Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History's 20th Century Style Icon series. This week I'm really excited because we're going to be looking at Divine. Before I even begin, and in the interest of political correctness, I want to explain which third-person pronoun I've decided to use for this video. I have decided to use he, because that is the third-person pronoun that Divine preferred. He didn't mind if people referred to him as she when he was in his female persona, but he generally preferred he, so that's the one that I'm going to use. Divine was born Harris Glenn Milstead in 1945 in Baltimore. All of his family called him Glenn, his middle name, and his parents were pretty affluent, sort of upper middle class, and very doting and devoted. They gave little Glenn everything he wanted. They couldn't say no to him, especially when he asked for treats. As a consequence, he grew up with a weight problem that would plague him for the rest of his life and eventually cause his death. It also meant that he was bullied at school, not just for being plump, but because he wasn't good at the things that boys of his age were supposed to be good at. For example, sport. When he was a teenager, however, he discovered there was something he was very good at. He was good at dressing up as a lady. This is the teenage Glenn going to a costume party with a girlfriend, and he decided to go as Elizabeth Taylor. Doesn't he look elegant? He trained as a hairdresser. He went to beauty school and he worked as a hairdresser for a little while, but the 9-to-5 grind wasn't for him. He fell in with the artsy, avant-garde Baltimore crowd, and it is here that he met an aspiring young filmmaker called John Waters, and the rest is movie history. Over the next 20 years, Divine would feature in nearly all of John Waters' movies, but it started here with The Roman Candles. This was an art house movie, incredibly amateur and low budget, in which Divine played the Smoking Nun. Next up, Eat Your Makeup, where interestingly Divine portrayed Jackie Kennedy, not in quite the same way as Natalie Portman's portrayal, but an interesting take on the character nonetheless. There were lots of these little 16mm movies, including Mondo Trasho, a gutter film in which Divine basically played Divine, but the breakthrough movie for both John Waters and Divine was without a doubt 1972's notorious Pink Flamingos, which Variety said was one of the most vile, stupid, and repulsive films ever made. This is true, but it was also anarchic, subversive, and terribly funny. And it was in Pink Flamingos that Divine really honed this bizarre on-screen persona. He played a character called Babs Johnson, who was billed as the filthiest woman alive. Bold, brash, loud, terrifying, vulgar, quite disgusting, but also incredibly compelling and unbelievably hilarious. With the help of makeup artist and wardrobe designer Van Smith, Divine really solidified this peculiar on-screen image with this grotesque and yet at the same time rather glamorous makeup and extraordinary bouffant hair. And it was in Pink Flamingos, of course, that Divine dons one of the most iconic dresses in movie history, this skin-tight bright red bugle dress. I would argue that this is as famous as Monroe's white dress in 7-Year Itch, or Audrey's Breakfast at Tiffany's Givenchy. Anyone who knows movies knows these three dresses. So what was the inspiration behind Divine's on-screen image? Well, both Divine and Van Smith drew quite a lot from their own memories of growing up in Baltimore in the early and mid-1960s. So we see a lot of very mainstream looks, subverted, bouffants and beehives. Divine also drew on the bad girls of the early 60s, as well as the sweater girls and the strippers. This was all kind of trailer trash inspired. And it drew on the most extremes of the 50s and early 60s, as well as those rather embarrassing and tacky sexy moments. Divine's makeup was just an outrageous and exaggerated version of the typical 1950s, early 60s cat eye. Throw in a bit of leopard print, a large dose of inspiration from photographer Diane Arbus and the interesting women she photographed, and pepper it all with a nice dash of Russ Meyer. And voila, the end result is Divine. You see, what Divine did was the opposite to what most drag artists do. What most drag artists do is this. They take the most beautiful, elegant, and glamorous aspects of female fashion and beauty. They appropriate it and then they exaggerate it so that it is even more glamorous and beautiful. Divine did the opposite. He took the very worst and made it worse. So certainly Divine was a style icon, but was he a fashion influencer? I'm going to offer up a little theory that says that he was. Take a look at this image here and then remember that Pink Flamingos came out in 1972. Look at that hair, look at that weird spiky makeup. Think about all of the fetish wear, the PVC, all of that kind of thing, that very subversive look. And then take a look at this. This is Jordan, punk rocker, photographed in London, 75, 76-ish. Don't you think there's parallels there? Take a look at this British punk image. I think it's drawing on very much the same aesthetic as Divine. This is Divine in Female Trouble, 1974. The mohawk hair, that makeup, the chain around her neck. And then look at this lad on the streets of London in the mid-1970s. Certainly, the punk crowd would have seen Pink Flamingos. And I honestly think that there is a similar aesthetic going on here. I think it's very possible that some of these kids saw Divine and Pink Flamingos or Female Trouble and thought, wow, that looks subversive and weird and kinky and cool, and perhaps Divine influenced them. But I've always thought of Divine as sort of a proto-punk character. In fact, these movies were punk movies in many, many ways, weren't they? They were anarchic, they were anti-establishment, they were seditionary, they were out to shock, all of the things that punk rock was. And I would argue that Pink Flamingos was more shocking than anything punk rockers did. If you know the movie, you'll know the scene I'm talking about, and that is all I'm going to say about it. Divine continued to make movies through the 80s. Here he is with former 1950s heartthrob Tab Hunter. They had incredible on-screen chemistry together. They were sort of a twisted Rock Hudson and Doris Day, if you like. In fact, they made two movies together, the other being the notorious Lust in the Dust, a period drama. Divine performed in cabaret, and he also had quite a successful musical career on the disco scene, but the one thing that eluded him was acceptance as an actor in the mainstream. And then in 1988, Hairspray came out. Hairspray was John Waters' first mainstream movie, and it featured Divine as Edna Turnblad, mother of Tracy Turnblad, Ricky Lake, and wife of Jerry Stiller, who you probably know as Ben Stiller's father, or remember him from Seinfeld. In Hairspray, Divine famously said that nobody could ever accuse him of being a drag queen because no self-respecting drag queen would ever allow themselves to look like this, even though in the movie Edna does get a fabulous makeover. I'm not joking when I tell you that Divine's performance as Edna Turnblad is really one of my favorite movie performances of all time. There is not a second that you don't believe that Edna is a real woman and a kind and put upon Baltimore mum. Interestingly, Divine also played a rather nasty character in Hairspray. He had a double role, playing this guy here, but it wasn't the first time that Devine played a man. He always wanted to play more male characters. He saw himself as an actor who could play both female roles and male roles. Hairspray opened to critical acclaim. Don't you love this photograph of John Waters with his old friend Devine at the premiere? Those boys had certainly been on a long and interesting journey together, hadn't they? Critics hailed Devine's performance. He was featured on magazines. He did the talk show circuit. Within a couple of weeks of Hairspray opening, he was offered a role on Married with Children, which was the big TV sitcom at the time. And he was actually offered the role of the family's uncle. So he got to play a male role, which is something he really wanted to do. All of this makes it so sad because just 3 weeks after Hairspray debuted, Devine died of a massive heart attack in his sleep. All of his dreams had come true at last. And so, on the one hand, it's rather sad, but on the other hand, he certainly died a happy man. This is his grave, and just like Oscar Wilde's grave at Père Lachaise Cemetery, fans visit it and leave lipstick kisses, and they also leave him little gifts. And you can see the gifts here, makeup brushes and eyeliners and powder puffs. I'm sure he'd have loved that. Well, Devine's legacy certainly lives on. For example, photographer and filmmaker Naomi Lee Cohen recently did an homage to Pink Flamingos, but this time a real lady played Babs Johnson. This is Melissa McCarthy channeling Devine. And of course, fashion editorials go back to John Waters and Devine and that whole gang time and time again. And it's so interesting to me because these movies were originally so vilified. They were so anti-establishment and so anarchic, and yet over time they have really become a part of our collective American cultural iconography, haven't they? And there are those who say that Ursula, the sea witch from Disney's The Little Mermaid, is based on Devine. What do you think? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this rather camp episode of 20th Century Style Icons. You can contact me through my website, amandahalley.com. Join our Facebook group. We always have lots to talk about over there. I'm back every Wednesday and Saturday with new episodes, so just click the little circle to subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.